So now we're going to talk about how we're going to add materials to our model here so it doesn't look so vibrant, right? So in order to do that, what we have to do is, before we were in the Content Library tab, we're going to need to switch over to the Material tab. So let's click this. Okay, so notice how the user interface has changed slightly, and now what's going to happen is as I drag out, you see how the name of the material is being picked up? And this was generated in SketchUp, so that's where this name is coming from, right? Every time I hover over a new object, I get a new name, but also pay attention to the highlight, right? Pay attention to the yellow highlight. So now, let me zoom out a bit. You see this green area that's called lawn? It's picking up all the green faces as lawn. So what's the benefit of this is I only have to make the material change once, and every single green face that shares the same name will be changed at once, which is really useful because, say over here where I have the mulch, I've got 5 to 6 different regions, and I wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't want to make a material for each region. It's best I just collapse the material into one name and I change it all at once. So to edit a material, I'm going to zoom in and let's go down to our windows over here, right? So this is a black metal. If you remember from the reference image, we're going to do like a black paint on these metallic windows. So I'm going to click this. And when you first click a material, it's going to give you one or two options. It'll either say new or it'll give you the material library tab. Okay. What's cool about this is you can choose from all these different pre-built materials, right? Which is super useful. Just like the asset library that's got all the people and nature, you've got hundreds, if not thousands of different materials to choose from, right? So this is kind of a painted metal. So for this example, let's just find a metal. I'm going to go right over here to the metal category. And look at this. We've got different pages of all different types of metal. And just like the starting templates, if I start with a metal that looks like this, I can easily customize it to look like this, right? I'm not going to be penalized if I choose the wrong asset, which is really nice. All these materials are built up by different settings, sliders, and textures. And so you can easily switch between them, which is really cool. So I want to find something that kind of looks like a metal that I want to customize a bit. So let's do a little browsing. And I want to go with this one, metal 12. And I know this isn't black metal, right? But the point is, I want to show you how we're going to make it black metal. So I'm going to click this, and you'll notice that it has changed it slightly, but I don't have any settings to edit this. So if I actually double click this, it's going to open up my material editor. Okay, so I'm going to go up close. And one of the reasons I chose this base sample is just so we can get some texture on the actual windows, because when we're painting windows, there's going to be some like brush lines and everything. Same thing from the metal fabrication process. There's going to be, a brushed metal look to it. So the first thing I want to point out is right here where it says color. This is a color hue. So watch this. I'll make this red, and you'll notice nothing's changed. So why hasn't anything changed? There is a texture slot here, right? And it's at 100%. So it's a tug of war. 100% means favor the texture map 100%. If I lower it, it's going to start favoring the color, right? So 0% means 100% of the color. It's the inverse, right? If I go back to 100, it's 100% of the texture. So why would I use this? Let's say I want to add a subtle hue, right? We want to make this black. If I start lowering this, I'm going to get the texture data, right? And the color. So look at that. So now I'm getting that black, but I'm also getting the texture, right? And that's really the point of this, right? So I wind up doing this all the time because I find that sometimes the materials I find online or the textures aren't perfect and I need to tweak it. That's what this is for. So the next one is the map scale. I zoom in. The map scale is how big this texture is. So I'm going to start lowering this. So see how much higher res it looks because the texture was stretched. So now I'm bringing it in. If I go the other way, it's going to be super big. And if you find, again, that the slider is a little too crazy, you can hold down Shift and it'll slow it down for you, right? So I'm going to be somewhere around there. Basically, I want to see some of the variation from far away. So maybe I boost this up a little bit. Okay. Next is relief. Okay. So for those who don't know what this is a normal map. And this is what's going to drive whether or not some pixels are raised or lowered. So watch this. If I increase this, pay attention right here. See how it's super smooth now because I lowered it? And here we've got some of those brushed areas raised. That's what normal's going to do, or your relief, right? So I'm going to raise that a little bit just so we've got some texture. Again, it's a painted surface, so it's not going to be 100% smooth. Okay, so let's say 125. If I ever want to be precise, I can always double click and just type that in. Okay, and if you ever want to swap out a texture for a slot, you can actually just go here, you can delete it and import a new one. You can also invert it if it's coming in the wrong way. Like let's say you've got a brick normal map and like the bricks are actually sunk. That's why you would do an invert. Okay, so now we've got roughness, reflectivity, and metalness. So these three, in my opinion, they kind of go hand in hand. It's like three different ways to control the reflectivity of your material. That might sound a little weird. These three, although they all kind of control the reflectivity to some degree, they control different parts of it. So what I mean by that is if I lower roughness, you see how it's beginning to look more like a mirror? And I'm going to lower the relief to 0. Just, you don't need to follow along on this part, but just so you understand. A 0 roughness means a perfect mirror, okay? A higher value of roughness is going to make it matte, okay? It's going to have essentially no reflection. So think of it almost like a rubber, right? Something that's going to absorb reflections. So again, this is super bright mirror. And now let's talk about the reflectivity. So think of the reflectivity as the brightness of the reflections. So it's best if I just increase this. See what's happening here? See how much brighter it looks? So this is basically saying I want to control how bright the highlights of my reflection are, right? So I want to keep this, somewhere around there. I want to have some reflection, right? And the roughness, I'm going to leave it here just, for the sake of this example. You don't need to follow along. We'll customize this in a moment. And metalness, think of this as whether or not the object is metal or not, right? An object that is metal should be at 100%. An object that isn't metal should be 0, right? And you'll notice that as we raise it, it looks more and more like a metallic object, right? If I were to just, let me hit save right here and grab another material. If I were to grab another material like a wood here, right, and I place this here, and I double click, notice how the metalness is at 0 because it's not metal. If I were to make it 100, it's going to look a little bit more, but we're not actually going to see a difference because of the roughness, right? So watch this. See what's happening there? See how it's beginning to look more and more metal? So that's why it's important to think about like what the material is, right? So I'm going to keep this right around there. I can definitely lower it if I want, but the idea is it's important to tell Lumion whether or not it's metallic. And you'll notice that, there is this range from 100 to 200, and this is when it's going to start using the texture. Since this is just flat, this is going to give the texture a little bit more power. So in general, you'll probably end up just being from like 0 to 100, but you have this extra range if you need to push the texture a little bit further. So I'm going to put this somewhere around here and let me just fix everything. We'll add a little bit of relief, add a little bit of roughness. Okay. And again, this is like a painted window, so it's going to have some gloss to it, right? And maybe I'll lower this a bit. Okay, I'm just going to sit here and customize a little. Want it to have a little bit of roughness, yeah. Okay, cool. And the cool part is I can always go back. So you notice before I hit Save Changes, if I click that and then click Roof, right, and then switch back to my windows, my progress is saved, right? So I didn't lose everything. So it's actually good to, be aware of that. You don't need to commit to everything 100%. So I'll notice that right here, it's kind of shining a bit. So this is where I'll start playing with the reflectivity and the roughness just to make sure everything's kind of consistent, right? So we'll do that. So I'm happy with these settings. Now let's talk about what all these settings do down here. Okay, so if you don't see this, you might just have to hit show more. So this is where you can control whether or not an object is emissive. Emissive just means glow, right? So it's basically adding a light. Since it's black, it's not going to look like anything. But watch this. See how it's like emitting light? So that's what that's doing. So I'm going to get rid of that. Switch that back to black. Displacement. This is for if you have a displacement map. Think of this as normal's big brother. This is going to let the pixels go a little bit further. It uses a technology that kind of adds geometry to make things look like they were modeled when you didn't model them. So that's the purpose of that. We have opacity. So think of this as like windows or curtains. Do you want something to be opaque or transparent? So that's what that's going to do. And then subsurface scattering. If you're unfamiliar with this is basically when light enters an object and it bounces around. Think of like the cartilage behind your ears, how they kind of glow when you're outside. That's what this is for. UV coordinates. Let me zoom in really close. This is going to let you offset things. So you see how I'm moving the texture? That's what that's going to do. And then we have our rotation tools, right? It's the same thing as the assets. If you want to rotate them on a specific axis or not, that's what that's for. Okay. Weathering. This one is one of my favorites. And what this will do is actually simulate a weathering pattern on an asset. So I'm going to crank this up to 100, right? And notice how it added all this detail. Obviously we're not going to leave this, right? But it's just to help illustrate the point. It's actually going to follow the geometry. So it understands where edges are, which is really crazy because if you were to add all this detail by hand, it would take forever. But you've got different color profiles, right? So silver removes some of those whites. Plastic, like iron is going to give you some of that rust. So that's why there's these different profiles. But what's nice about it is like it does add all this information here. Like if I were to lower this, right, to something more realistic, you see how it added some nice shading in here? Some slight edges right around there. Yeah, that looks great. Looks really nice. Okay, I'm just going to hit Save Changes, and I want to show you what the foliage tool will do, right? So what this will do is it'll actually spawn ivy. So as I increase the spread, it's going to generate ivy. So you don't need to model this. So this is super useful. You can change the color of it. You can change the profile and everything. So I'm just going to cancel and let's go back here. And the last important one under settings, soften edges. Check this out. If you look closely, you see how everything is a 90 degree. In the real world, we don't have sharp 90 degrees. Everything's got a slight little rounded edge or bevel, right? Or chamfer. That's going to actually add that. Look, see how the light is being caught on that? Off, on. So you would never model that, right? It would add too much geometry to your scene. It would make everything slow and heavy. This is a nice way to add to your material or your model. So I always have a little bit of soften edges and a little bit of weathering on every single material because it's going to add all that realism. Then we have texture saturation. This is just going to desaturate your texture right here. This is grayscale, so we don't need that. Clear coat, let's say you're doing a car paint. That's what that's going to do. And flicker reduction we talked about before when you have overlapping planes. Okay, so those are the basics of what the material editor offers. In the next video, we're going to go in and we're going to customize all the different materials for our project.